Welcome to another episode of VNture podcast, your weekly source of visual novel goodness. I am Emar, and together with Tauros, we shall venture into another discussion about VS. Today we venture into space, or well, at least talk about that being the most common trope when it comes to science fiction. And believe me or not, there are plenty of different types. So Tauros, when will you read the best sci-fi, Evenical?
I think we may differ on how much you think Evenical counts as science fiction. But you know what? That's what we're here to discuss. The whole wide world of science fiction is a vast place, and I think first we gotta iron down the definition of what exactly is science fiction, what separates it from fantasy. MR, do you have any thoughts first to share on that?
It's very hard to define it per se. The first thing is we tend to separate science fiction into hard and soft types. And that in it of itself is problematic in a way. Does it even feel like that? Depending on, with the hard science fiction, often focusing on logical explanation that are explored very thoroughly. Whereas the soft is like, space travel exists. Okay, don't ask questions.
I heard a good example of the difference between hard and soft sci-fi as being, a character introduces another character. Hey, this is a time machine I built. And that one guy asks, okay, how do you use it? In the hard science fiction, the character would respond, oh, let me tell you all about it. And then he'd go down into the scientific breakthroughs and talking about the elements of quantum supercomputing with recent research shown by modern day theories from Albert Einstein and blah, 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 and go way off into the technical details. Whereas a soft science fiction story would instead say, oh, well, how do you use it? You sit in the chair and you punch some numbers and then you close the door and poof, it takes you to wherever you want. And so, yes, that's a very good example of how some authors really approach the two differences in sci-fi. Yeah.
Yeah, this example is quite apt, although I have to admit it's quite funny. This entire topic of types of sci-fi is spawned when I read 9-9. I full disclosure, because that's a title. I don't know if it's a sci-fi or not, and maybe when we talk about definitions, why I bring it up, maybe the sci-fi is somewhere in the uncanny valley, defined by barrier of understanding. Okay, and why I mean by that? Okay, let's unpack that. During the course of the story, in 9-9, you encounter a lot of supernatural powers, people that use supernatural powers. So I was inclined to believe, it's fantasy. I guess they cast spells and fireballs. But very early on, you get a contact from a corporation managing artifacts that manifest those powers. And every single time you ask about those powers, you get a very corporate answer. Yeah, sorry, there's regulation on creating them. Like, what corporate, what regulations? And then you press on. You want to know, okay, how do they function? Are those on batteries? And then the title, I think, says, okay, enough. See this? We're talking about, I'm from another dimension, and our type of communication requires translation of words. And there are no adequate words for me to explain you how those artifacts work. I'm like, oh my god, is it sci-fi or not? I need an answer now.
In that case, that kind of errs more into the realm of fantasy.
Exactly. But there exists, there's a character that says there exists a logical explanation for all of that, but you won't understand it. I'm like, does it? So, I mean, from the perspective of protagonist, then it's a fantasy. But what?
Well, the difference is, I mean, in this case, it's It could feasibly exist, and it does. It does have an explanation. It's just simply, well, I won't get bogged down into the details, and we'll just hand wave it off. I mean, so one element of sci-fi, I feel, is that it has to feature technology that isn't possible at the time. It could feasibly be possible in the future, and I'd say actually that's an important element of being sci-fi. But as of now, it's not, and that's how we get into elements of the wondrous, of this being fiction, of seeing things that shouldn't be possible, but someday it probably will be. Whereas with fantasy stories have elements in them that are simply impossible, that are just a very different aspect of the world. Kind of like the most typical fantasy, setup is a medieval English town of swords and magic, where you've got fantasy creatures like elves and goblins, and you go around casting magic missile at enemies. That sort of stuff, we're never going to make technological improvements to where we can just start summoning mana from the air around us. Like, maybe in the far-flung future we'll get some sort of technological equivalent for it, but I mean, it's kind of like calling electricity magic. It's not exactly the same. This is this and that is that. And so your example in 9-9, how it's like, well, this is some sort of special technology, I just can't explain it to you. I mean, that implies that it's totally possible one day, so the story's treating it like sci-fi, right?
Exactly, and there are not so subtle hints that the character you converse with from another dimension that collects their artifacts, hints that yes, they are from parallel world, from a bit of an alternate history, but with a common element with your world. So it's kind of feasible, but at some point you'll catch up to their technology. So it's I'm like, no, please tell me, it's fantasy or sci-fi. Give me straight. I was so confused. Oh my god.
Oh dear, that's questionable.
Right, like, and maybe this is a me problem because I try to understand it completely, and every single time I get any scrap of detail, like, yeah, you won't get it. I'm like, you just tell me straight. Tell me straight. Does it run on batteries? I need to know.
Can you go to the store and pop some double A's into it and make it work?
But there are people with superpowers, right? Or supernatural powers, right? Okay. So how you deal with that? And the answer is, you have to use special medicine. Like, what? So you say to me that there is a biological component to all of that suddenly? Like, what? How? No. So, yeah. That title was so confusing. I felt, okay, yes, you know what? I need to talk about types of sci-fi with powers because this topic is just crazy. God.
I mean, oh my goodness. You have a much simpler example with something like Lucy, the eternity she wished for. It takes place, in the near future. It's a world just like ours, but there exist androids. And so you figure, okay, everything else about the world is just the same as our present day reality. And you just figure, okay, there's been some advancements to create darn capable, realistic, artificial intelligence robots. And so the rest of that story is about him coming across an android girl named Lucy, her getting taken into the house and her doing chores and being useful and whatnot. And everything else about the world is still standard to modern day living. And I feel like that's one element of sci-fi that has to be present. Is that sure, you have this one big breakthrough, the one thing that separates your sci-fi world from the present day. But everything else still has to be normal. This main character still has to wake up and he still has to wash up and go to school and talk with his friends and come back and eat meals and whatnot. It's just that now there's this robot AI. And so I really like science fiction stories that hold themselves to that principle. that, ask themselves one question and that becomes their entire presence. Like, what if gravity was reversed? And then you address the real life consequences of how people would live in such a scenario and what other steps they'd have to take and how that would completely change our normal life as you know it. Sometimes you can go on a really wild course of action, like what if interstellar space travel was possible? It's like, well, obviously, then there'd be a huge emphasis on traveling beyond the stars, and there'd be all sorts of different worlds. And then they think of the industries, think of the new settlements and aliens and whatnot. And you could just go off in a ton of directions. But still, it's that core one question of what if something that's not currently possible nowadays, interstellar travel, was now suddenly commonplace? What then? How would the world look like in that situation? To me, that's one of the biggest appeals of sci-fi. Something that's so, out there, something unbelievable, but still so close to home. Is that
something you can feasibly see yourself maybe experiencing, unlike casting fireballs and channeling mana? Right?
Well, I totally would like to cast fireballs.
Oh, true.
But yes, I mean, you could hope that, at some point in my lifetime, I'll get to see interstellar travel be realistic. Whereas, on the other hand, casting a fireball, it's like, as described in these fantasy stories, that's never going to happen.
Yeah. But speaking of things I would like to see happen during my lifetime, cat girls, okay?
Cat girls.
I had to mention it. It has to be said, it has to be discussed, okay? And you knew I'm going to bring this example because it is something that maybe even fits into that. And obviously, I'm talking about Kara Kara. No, it's not the Necrophar. Kara Kara is a story that takes place in the post-apocalyptic and deals with genetic mutations. And that's their explanation, that since the apocalypse, everybody mutated and has cat ears, okay? I'm not hoping for apocalypse, okay? But cat ears? Okay. Just think about it.
Okay. So then I guess the question you're getting at is, does this mean Kara Kara and genetically mutated cat girls is an element of a science fiction story?
Yes.
I mean, on the face of it, I'm inclined to say yes. This is something that's very not feasible today, but at some point it could be possible. We genetically modify cat ears onto the top of people's heads. Many people are, half ironically wishing it someday becomes reality.
I'm one of the believers, okay?
Oh boy. But on that note, it feels weird though, because usually the sort of cat girls you associate with moege, the type of slice of life, romance, lightheartedness. I think this is a very interesting aspect of sci-fi, is that it is a much more flexible genre than other types, such as action, such as mystery, such as romance. All of those kind of have bearings on what the story will shape up to be. But for sci-fi, honestly, it's more of a setting. Oftentimes, it's just an aspect of the world building, of the environment that surrounds these people, and the characters and the actions they take throughout the story shape up what kind of genre it's going to be. So you can very realistically have sci-fi stories with cat girls that's all about the slice of life moege. You could also have sci-fi stories that are entirely mysteries. You could have sci-fi stories that are totally action. And I think that's one very intriguing aspect of how you can find weird sci-fi influences in all sorts of different environments and with all sorts of different visual novels,
Yeah, and specifically, I probed the cat girl debate, obviously to make some jokes about it, right? But Kara Kara took the approach quite seriously and says, yeah, this is the part of our setting. This is quite unique to explore. and we defined a genetic freak for a person who isn't mutated. And that's the purpose of Karakara. The drama is, if you're the normal human, you're the odd one out. Everybody else is mutated already. To contrast that with Nekopara and typical Moege with cat girls, those just, those exist. That's it. So I would say that is definitely not sci-fi. It's as far as removed from sci-fi as possible, because they don't really treat it as any scientific thing. And just, it is. Bye.
I mean, could you go as far as to say that it's simply soft sci-fi? Where, of course, cat ears are not normal in the conventional sense. But the fact that they don't really address it and they just sort of hand wave it as if, oh yeah, cat girls, they're a thing. I mean, that's the difference between you have an apocalyptic setting like Karakara?
Yeah, Karakara.
Right. Karakara, where they go out of their way to explain it and to make it feasible and to give a lot of supporting details as to why the world is like this.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, it's another interesting angle. Yeah.
Yeah, I just don't know if not mentioning a deviation in a setting makes it a sci-fi. That's it, right? No one questions that. They just say it as a fact. Just that make it a sci-fi? To be honest, maybe not. Maybe that's actually a form of fantasy, not necessarily sci-fi.
Yeah. Right? Or just a willing suspension of disbelief that just pretend exactly. This is normal.
Yeah. So some sort of gray area of sci-fi-ness. And the opposite can also be true, right? Because space opera, grand, epic, adventurous space travel, aliens, all that. But now let's mix I have to mention that title, okay? I'll be brief. What happens when females have an episode on involuntary contact with alien appendages? Magical girls! And that's the plot of Dead End Ages.
Tell us more, MR.
No. Can you say tell us less?
Okay. So anyways, but what you're getting at is that you have the whole spaceships fighting aliens, chain of command, the pew-pew laser ships. Yes. And on the other hand, you also have magical girls of the existence of magic and a very, I guess, the PG sense of fighting evildoers and energy beams.
Yes.
And you have that mix of what's typically sci-fi with what's typically Saturday morning cartoon.
In a way, yeah.
Obviously, I'm kind of leaving out a few aspects.
Yeah, I know, but in a way, yes.
Interesting. In a way, yeah. And I mean, that's another way sci-fi can mix, right?
Yeah, and another favorite example when it comes... I don't even know how to name those things, okay? Maybe the name of the genre I'm trying to describe is when sci-fi hits you out of nowhere, okay? That's the new tag I invented. Sci-fi hits you out of nowhere.
Okay.
So, setup is this. You are the normal high school boy who goes to the normal high school. So you know it's not going to be normal, right? And you go to the debate club, okay? So you debate other clubs in a discussions because you need more budget for your debate club, okay? So you debate, you have logical or not so logical arguments, and they take form of, and because this is a VN with some gameplay elements, so you verbalize your arguments and they becomes hits. Oh, by the way, you mean not the terror. This is the title I'm talking about. Okay, so you go through the motions, the plot develops, you're a normal high school boy and you help someone become student council president because the elections are here and whoever wins the debate wins it all. Okay, you win the debate, but the plot twist, all of that was some intergalactical organization behind of that, and now you fight in Mecha. Why? Your entire set of skills of debating people, now you use them to battle with Mecha. How? Why? No, what? I was so confused, especially since during the preparation phase. So when you are trained up to be a better debater, obviously, to be a better debater, you go to VR, virtual reality, and you visit fantasy world to grind some items. Don't question it, okay? Don't question it. But later down the line, it's revealed you don't actually visit in VR because that's another dimension that you are being teleported in. I'm like, no, please don't. What are you doing with those genres? I don't know what the story is about. So you're saying to me, you had a setup of normal high school boy, goes to debate club, and you fight with words, but underlying all of that, there is a huge space opera conspiracy and huge organization fights that recruits whoever wins the presidency. Great. Which is amazing. Yeah, sure. But in order for you to train for that, you also visit a fantasy world with knights and swords and magic to train for that. Tell me, is that sci-fi?
That kind of sounds messy, to be honest.
Yes. Why? Think at some point is make it stop. Pick a genre. Pick something.
It makes for a very funny story, though.
It does. It does.
Yes.
Right.
On that note, okay, let's go. Let's bring it back to a conventional one. How about that?
Yeah.
We could talk about Valhalla. Valhalla.
Oh.
Yeah, it's a pretty unique, one of the few like cyberpunk kinds of science fiction out there. Even though you don't see much of it yourself because you're just a bartender in some hole-in-the-wall dive bar. You get to see the other characters, you get to hear their stories of what they're up to in their life. But still, the setting is unmistakably sci-fi. It takes place quite a ways into the future. There's a lot of weird things going on that you just have to accept as the reader, because the main character and the other characters around just roll with the punches, and you're like, oh, okay, I guess this is normal. So it has its own unique way of bringing the setting to you, and making you understand and follow with its rules, even though it doesn't explicitly ever explain it to you.
Exactly. You are in the know. You just accept because that's how the world always was. But for the reader, like, oh, that's actually interesting setting because, I don't think I'll encounter talking dogs, but I guess everything's possible.
Yeah. Talking dogs or robots or very strange constructs. But also, it also takes a lot of trust to have a sci-fi story like that continually evolves, that doesn't ever give you the explicit rules behind it. Because you have to be careful that at some point you don't go too far and suddenly your reader just rebels against it. Like, oh, that's stupid. Like, I'm going to make up something. Like, as an example, I'm going to make up something ridiculous. Like a talking octopus. Like 5 talking octopuses together in the shape of a man. Yeah. Something like that might be too far-fetched. And so a work like Valhalla has to always be aware of the new concepts it's introducing, making sure they line up in the world it's created. And like I said, I think that takes a lot of trust.
Oh. And to different people, there will be different levels of believability, right? Not everybody will suspend the disbelief to the same level. And maybe some of them like, but this doesn't work with this setting. Because they will start to question it if there is no explanation. Because the moment you will provide an explanation, then you'll be judged by the explanation level. If you don't provide any explanation, then you'll be judged by the tolerance of suspense of disbelief by the reader.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mentioned that Valhalla is kind of a cyberpunk type of science fiction. I was, digging around and doing some research into it, and when you think about it, there are so many different little subdivisions of sci-fi that aren't immediately obvious. Like, we talked about the hard and the soft elements, but there's also the space opera sort of thing you mentioned. How it's something that takes place in the wide expanse of outer space and wild journeys and exploring the frontiers. There's cyberpunk, like we mentioned. There's also like the dystopian and post-apocalyptic kind of world. Obviously that's not our current world. We're not living in ruins, bombed and shattered away. I hope not.
Yeah. Yeah.
But obviously you have something like Karakara, where, it's war-torn in a very different world than exists in ours right now.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. And of course, there's everyone's favorite time travel. A what if of going back in time, a whole redoing events with the knowledge that you have in a future. Obviously, we've got something like Steins Gates. That's like the poster child for this.
It's such a delicate thing to meddle with time because, oh god, you really have to nail it. And yeah, I know you haven't read it. I do recommend you reading that. And Steingate really nailed it.
I mean, there's hard and there's soft ways to go about, the whole aspects of time travel. You could provide, detailed explanations of how you utilize wormholes, and it can only be done in so-and-so ways because of threatening the delicate balance of yada, yada, yada. A whole bunch of scientific mumbo-jumbo.
Yeah.
And I mean, you also could just kind of hand-wave time travel as, oh, we just went down this river and suddenly we're old.
True.
Exactly.
True.
It can be as simple as that because, once again, sci-fi is kind of all just about the setting. It's up to the characters and the plot and the author to write the story they want to tell. And in this case, if you have someone who went down a river and now they've aged 30 years, it's like, how are things different? What about the people he knew? What about the world that has changed? What about his own mindset, maybe? It's exploring all those different relationships that would make a story, and the sci-fi aspect could possibly even be ignored right after that whole time travel river part, just as an example,
True. And not only when it comes to explanation, but also from the standpoint of how to tackle the grandfather paradox and all those going into the past to rewrite the future in which you went to the past. How do you solve all of that? And different types do it differently. Because, as long as it's outside of realm of our reality, we don't know what's the solution to those paradoxes. So there's creative freedom for that.
And that's just one aspect that makes science fiction so engaging. I don't know about but every time I read a sci-fi VN, there's always that sense of, oh, what is this one going to do? I don't know. It's going to be new, different, perhaps. We'll find out.
I mean, let's contrast that to a magic. Let's imagine there is a grand wizard that can reverse time, right? At that point, okay, that's it. You believe that there is a magic that reverses time? Done. But now, to contrast that with a sci-fi that deals with time travel, now you as a reader, you think, does it make sense? Where's the loophole? Wait, what this, what that? Right? I think there is a level of your engagement with a work, with sci-fi, that I prefer over the fantasy, just because you can reason, you can theorize, and you can even question those solutions and those proposals for science behind it all. Whereas in fantasy, you don't really can question magic or mana.
To a certain degree. I mean, generally, big picture, I would say so. But there are plenty of titles or shows or visual novels with magic systems that they go painstakingly in depth about. But like I said, I think the difference between that is that no matter how detailed your magic system becomes, it is somewhere far off from what can ever be possible in our real life.
Yeah.
The idea behind sci-fi is that if you get super detailed, or even if you just hand wave it off with zero explanation, there's still the inkling in the back of your head that like, oh man, maybe someday we can make that happen. I could be living that sort of life.
Yeah, and if you with that work of sci-fi, explain it into the great detail, and you, for example, say it's all because that new element in periodical table in chemistry. So now you think, if only they discover it, I'll leave that VM, okay? So you have that one. Yeah, if only that. Just please discover it, scientists.
Exactly. This mystery element can do everything, and it unlocks the secrets of the universe. Exactly. You're like, oh man, wouldn't that be awesome?
Yeah. I'll wait for next Tuesday. Come on, scientists, hurry up.
Yeah. Here we go. One last thing as we're coming near the end. I want to ask you a question, and I guess to anyone else listening. Are zombies science fiction? On the one hand, you've got it could be interpreted as the whole magic side of things, like you have a lich raising the dead back to life, waving his staff around. On the other hand, there's the very scientific, direction you could take with it, of shady scientists trying to reanimate the dead, or corruption of the living with all sorts of messed up nanomachines and whatever. You could also go that direction, right?
And the absolute classic, the Frankenstein's monster, right?
Yes. The whole point of someone using a mad scientist abusing their knowledge and power to go into forbidden teachings and to use science to create something that very much resembles a zombie.
So I would say zombies are pretty neutral. All it hinges is on the conduit. How do you create those? Whether or not those are by the use of fantastical magic and some sort of rituals, or maybe there's some electrifying, shocking solutions to reviving the dead.
Yes. Pretty soon, or someday, we can get like a monster mash of all the classic monsters as classified as sci-fi. Yeah, one day we'll make Dracula real too.
Oh yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Who knows?
Yeah. I'll look into. You can look forward to your Draculas. I'll look forward for my cat girls. Okay. So,
wait, can we switch?
Their own.
Can we switch? No.
No. Like.
Oh, curses. Well, on that note, I think we'll have to wrap up today's episode. Thank you everyone so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed and that you have a certain appreciation, maybe, or more of an understanding of all the ways science fiction can impact visual novels.
Yes, and please tell us in the comment, what's the sci-fi you like the most in the end? And with that being said, venture out.
Venture out.